Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Corner podcast, the show where I bring on guests from all different backgrounds to talk all the things mental health. I'm your host, Harry Potvin, and today is episode number 150. Man, I posted on Instagram stories, a couple days ago, but I can't believe we've made it to 150. I remember on episode 50, I was celebrating. I was like, wow, this is crazy. We made it to 50 episodes. And that was 100 episodes ago. So it's really crazy to think about, all the people I've met, all the discussions I've had, all the support I've been getting. Thank you guys so much for following me on this journey and following me with this show. It's been amazing. And, yeah, I don't know. It's weird to look back and think that there's been 150 of these bad boys. And the fact that some of you have listened to my voice for 150 episodes, you're the MVPs. So here's to another 100. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe, but I'm super thankful. So for episode 150, I wanted to switch it up a little bit. And this is actually an avenue that I've wanted to cover for so long because if you know me off camera, if you know me off the show, you know that I love animals. And I've loved animals my whole childhood, my whole time growing up, working at a zoo, as a kid, collecting bugs, studying animals. I love animals more than people. I love talking about animals and I love talking about people and mental health. And I just could never find a way to combine the three. Now, this next guest that I'm having on is the perfect way to combine the three. And I'm hoping that it kind of leads into more conversations like this. But my guest today is Dr. Nikki Savvides. Nikki is an environmental ethnographer studying the impact of tourism on non-human species. Her area of specialization for the past decade has been the welfare of captive elephants used for tourism in Thailand. So not only do we get into the topics of mental health in this episode, but we get to talk about elephant mental health, which is just it was just amazing. Unfortunately, the video couldn't work for some connection reason. Shout out to Zoom. I mean, if you follow me up to this point, you know that there's always issues, but we keep moving. So the video didn't work, but the audio is great, and I really wish you could see the video because I was just smiling ear to ear the whole time talking about elephants. I love elephants. I love talking about it, and Nikki was just such an amazing guest. So thank you so much for Nikki for coming on and sharing this stuff. I really appreciate it. Now, before we get into the episode today, guys, please like, comment, share, subscribe, give 5 stars if you're on that podcast platform, and share with someone who might want to hear this episode. It's a really great one, and I can't wait for you to listen. I'll talk to y'all very soon. Have a great rest of your day. Peace. And we are good to go. Nikki, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat to you today.
I am too, and I'm actually really excited about this episode specifically. I just mentioned it to you off camera, but it's a whole different angle on the show that I've tried so hard to bring on is the animal side because obviously I like animals more than people, as I'm sure you can kind of relate to some degree.
Mhm.
But I'm very excited to get into this. So my first question for you is like, what got you started in this field of work? Like, what inspired you to get there?
So I was already a researcher in animal studies at the University of Sydney, where I was doing my master's, which was about horses and humans, so human horse relationships. And I was kind of looking at the ethics of those relationships and how we can basically have happier, healthier horses by through communication and partnership and really caring about what horses experience. And then when I finished that research, I went to Thailand and ended up working at an elephant sanctuary for a month. And that sort of opened my eyes to like more interesting ideas around what animals experience. And there were some interesting parallels between horses and elephants that
Hmm.
I found. So it kind of was interesting to shift from one species to another in terms of my focus. But yeah, it was once I was at that sanctuary, Elephant Nature Park, which is just out of Chiang Mai in northern Thailand, that I became really interested in the experiences of elephants living in captivity and how we can improve those experiences and have happier, healthier elephants.
Right, absolutely. Now, did you originally go to Thailand for horses, or was it strictly for the elephant sanctuary?
It was actually just a holiday.
Oh.
So yeah, I rewarded myself with a holiday. I did kind of in my head, like I'd always been interested in the use of animals in tourism and entertainment.
Mhm.
So when I went over, I was kind of searching for a potential PhD topic, but leaving it pretty open ended. And I did start off. I volunteered on a stray dog organization in Bangkok when I was first there, and had an absolutely amazing time. Did that for about 2 weeks, and then headed up north and was sort of traveling through Chiang Mai, finding something to sort of take me in a certain direction, and came across Elephant Nature Park, and that was kind of a fortuitous thing that sort of started out my whole journey with elephants, and that was all the way back in 2008.
Man,
So yeah, it was really a holiday that turned into something more.
that is so awesome.
Yeah, it was great, and it was really good to be like, oh, this is something I can do a PhD about. Like it was that kind of topic that I knew would be such a great thing to explore with so many different questions and ideas and concepts.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Now, when you were over there, like, what were some of the things that you did in terms of like trying to answer those questions for your research?
Well, so that very first trip was one of many that I took over the next 7 or 8 years. And so that really early trip was sort of my first exposure and education to the welfare issues that elephants suffer from in the tourism industry and in the illegal logging industry in Thailand as well. So working at the sanctuary kind of opened my eyes to the use of elephants in various ways in Thailand. But at that very early stage, I guess I saw things very black and white
Hmm.
um, in terms of the need of elephants to be rescued from certain situations, which obviously is, that's always an issue. There are elephants in, poor situations in Thailand and other countries around the world that do need our help and do need rescuing and do need to be, they're in a condition where they need to be taken to a sanctuary. But as my research drew on, I started to understand how complex the issue was, and the fact that, of the 3.5 to 4,000 elephants in Thailand that currently live in captivity, um, there's not enough space, there's not enough room or resources to rehome them in sanctuaries or release any number of them into the wild. So I started to become interested in how we can use more ethical forms of tourism to improve their lives, as sort of like the best option and the most practical and pragmatic option.
Right, absolutely. I mean that point you just made is so not I don't want to say interesting because it sounds too positive, but it seems like interestingly sad the fact that there's not enough room in Thailand to currently rehome all of them. Now,
Mm.
like what are some of the ways that elephants are being used in tourism today? Because you see it all the time. You see the people posing for pictures with elephants, and then you see the people saying, don't do that. But you've probably got more experience or more knowledge on what's actually being done than a lot of people on Instagram. So, what are some of the negative ways that they're being used in that industry?
Well, there has been a massive shift over the past couple of decades, but kind of the worst examples of the use of tourism are the more kind of traditional style tourism camp or tourist camp where tourists go to ride an elephant, watch them in a show or a circus,
Mm,
and the elephants don't have much freedom. If they're not working, they're chained up most of the day and night. And there are some places that are more traditional that have more funding that kind of do care for their elephants better than others. So it's kind of care ranges across a spectrum at some of these traditional camps. And the shift that's occurred in elephant tourism over the past couple of decades has really been around providing alternatives to those sorts of camps and those sorts of activities, and also influencing those camps to improve their conditions and change what they offer to tourists. So a big part of that has been not just the work of conservationists and welfare advocates in reshaping the industry, but also tourists having to really think about what they want to see and what
mm,
they're okay with. And I think that's been, just as important, in that so much of it comes down to what tourists are okay with, or so if you have an option between, because most people who go to Thailand want to see an elephant. Like, there's reminders of it everywhere you go in Thailand. There's images of elephants, and statues of elephants, and things at markets, so painted elephants, and all kinds of stuff. So you constantly have this reminder of Thailand as being the land of elephants. So the fact that people might choose, rather than going to see, say, an elephant painting or an elephant playing soccer, instead thinking, I want to go somewhere where I'd just like to watch an elephant, like just observe some elephants, or wash them or feed them in a small group. Like, that's kind of, it's good for tourists to make those decisions. And the more often they make those decisions, the quicker the industry shifts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. That definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, because you have that one type of photo that tourists like to take is when they're riding the elephant. I don't know, is that like a negative kind of tourism thing?
There's a few debates around it. The difficult thing is, because due to deforestation, elephants and their caretakers, who are known as mahouts, are really reliant on tourism to survive.
Hmm.
So boycotting tourism is not an answer. It is about improving tourism. And riding is one of the least ideal, I guess, tourism practices, although there's a range of data, from stuff saying, research saying, oh, it's not as bad as people make out, to others saying, it does cause all these issues with their backs and foot health, and, the curvature of the spine, and, just the monotony and the boredom. But it's kind of, it's across the spectrum in terms of the potential welfare issues. So I think the important thing is that we can't boycott tourism, we can shift tourism. So we don't necessarily need to say that riding should never happen. Maybe riding occurs in some situations where welfare is really high, where the elephants aren't working that hard, where there's thought put into the load that they're carrying, the saddle that they're carrying, and there's veterinary, vets on site if they need help. Like, that kind of thing is, very different to even if you had somewhere that claimed to care for its elephants because it didn't offer riding, but actually ended up with a lot of tourists crowding the elephant, or not having sufficient veterinary care, all that kind of stuff. So it is very complex, and it's kind of hard to know until you go somewhere sometimes, that you can see whether the elephants are being treated well or not. And that's where I think, like, the internet is great, because there are so many opportunities for people to share their experiences and share videos, and sort of allow other tourists to make decisions, and it kind of also pushes the tourist sites to do better, because they're aware that anything that looks pretty dodgy is going to possibly be shared on social media.
Right, yeah, there's that extra pressure for everyone to perform.
Yeah, exactly. So it is a little bit of accountability.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Now, I mean, I said I like animals more than people, but admittedly, my knowledge is pretty restricted on elephants, specifically those in Thailand. But what is like what is the situation currently in Thailand, and I guess the world, when it comes to elephants in captivity and in the wild? Like, is it kind of like tigers in the sense where there's more in captivity than in the wild currently?
In Thailand, there are.
Hmm.
So yeah, about 3,500 to 4,000 captive elephants, and somewhere around 2,000-ish wild elephants. They're quite geographically, excuse me, geographically isolated, in that the wild elephants are in national parks. A lot of those are in the south of the country, where the majority of captive elephants live in the north and northeast, as well as some of the resort towns and islands like Phuket and Koh Samui. So yeah, the captive elephant population is a lot larger, and there's an argument to be made that um, elephants in captivity could be useful for conservation work.
Hmm.
But there's also, this wild population that needs protection in rapidly, excuse me, rapidly declining habitats.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Is poaching as big in Thailand as it is in Africa?
It does happen. There's I can't speak much to Africa, but in terms of Thailand,
Hmm.
poaching does occur for tusks. Poaching also occurs for people who'd like to get younger elephants into tourism.
Mm.
So that often happens on the border with Myanmar. Um, but yeah, the majority of elephants in Thailand are have been born into captivity, and their ancestors, were caught from the wild decades or centuries ago. So the actual practice of poaching or capturing elephants from the wild was banned several decades ago. But yeah, it does still occur on occasion.
Okay, yeah, right on. Yeah, and I mean, I guess that kind of solidifies the point because I worked at a zoo. I worked at the
Mhm.
Toronto Zoo, and a big thing that everyone would come at me with, or people that I worked with, is like you have to release this animal.
Mm,
No matter what, like we would be like, hey, all the animals at the zoo were born in captivity, and they're like, you have to release it in the wild. But I think a lot of people kind of forget that when you're born in captivity, that I mean, that's not gonna do anything positive for the animal to just let it out.
mm. Yeah, exactly. And with elephants, it's actually interesting because they have in Thailand released captive elephants into the
Hmm.
wild, well, semi-wild, kind of reserves, and they're still very much closely monitored. Um, and those elephants are actually done pretty well. They have adapted and they have, started to express more natural behaviors in that environment. But due to the amount of like the large range area they require and the number of them, and the fact that 70% of Thailand's forests have been devastated,
Mm.
um, there just isn't the space to release them. So I do get that a lot too. Oh well, we just need to release them into the wild. And I guess when I first started doing the research, my head was vaguely in that place too. Oh, if we could only just release them into the wild. And then once I started to learn the story of deforestation, it became clearer to me why that's just not a viable option and why we need to look at alternatives to to have elephants living in more natural surroundings,
Hmm.
um, that are somehow kind of like a halfway point between full on captivity living in tourist sites and being able to spend time roaming during the day and socializing and having more opportunities for natural grazing and foraging. So yeah, I was really in my research looking at um, how we can, what is the potential for offering that kind of experience to elephants.
Right, definitely. So for your research, did you only do elephant sanctuaries, or I mean, this might be a dumb question, but did you ever go and do research at like zoos that were like local zoos or anything, or was it strictly sanctuaries?
I didn't do zoos in Thailand. No, I went to some of the traditional tourist camps, the ones offering rides and shows. I went to a couple of sanctuaries, and then I also worked on some community-based welfare and conservation projects. And that actually ended up being the bulk of my research was at one particular community-based project where I worked on and off for several years as both a volunteer and a volunteer coordinator and educator.
Hmm.
And that was sort of my main focus was, yeah, captive elephant care in community settings. But yeah, no, I never went to any zoos for my elephant specific work.
Right. And in doing your research, like I know you said that there's been a shift in recent years and it's getting better, but in terms of like elephant welfare and elephant like mental wellness, like what did some of your findings suggest when you were doing your research?
Expression of the natural behaviors and that like things like foraging and roaming and socializing, playing, uh, and the sort of the restriction on those activities is what really causes elephants to suffer,
Hmm.
and a lot of that happens just because of space limitations, especially in community settings where you might have a couple of hundred elephants living in a pretty small space. It happens from being chained up a lot of the day and all of the night. So for me, what I was most interested in was looking at how those projects, which were mainly volunteer tourism projects, funded by mainly Western volunteers, as well as conservation and welfare organizations in Thailand. So I was interested in how those projects improved elephant welfare and well-being. And that was primarily through things like enrichment. And enrichment took a variety of forms. So in that one village where I did most of my research, the main way of improving welfare was by having the elephants off their chains, walking every day for several hours a day. And on those walks, they could socialize with one another. They could swim in dams and rivers. They could forage naturally. They could cover themselves with dirt, like all the sort of simple elephant life things that really improve their lives. So, and at sanctuaries, it's a better environment generally than the community-based projects in terms of having a bit better of an environment for grazing and that sort of stuff, and not this sort of need to chain them up pretty much constantly. So those sanctuaries are doing similar things. It's really about allowing the elephants to express natural behaviors, and a lot of that just comes through allowing them to roam and forage and socialize.
Right. You may have mentioned this, sorry, but why do they chain them up at night?
It's for space. It's space limitations. So you can't have a bunch of elephants wandering around, especially in a small village or a small sanctuary. There could be aggression from one to the other. They could get out of the place and end up in farms and then, get shot by farmers. Bull elephants, you definitely cannot have roaming around. So in the community project that I worked on, where, there were at the time when I was working there, 200 elephants in a very small village.
Wow.
They did need to be chained up at night and part of the day. But the primary reason for that is deforestation. So the loss of elephant habitats and also the loss of traditional methods of keeping elephants, and land once used for keeping elephants being turned into roads and highways and developments and rice fields and everything basically that just reduce the land that elephants can live on. Yeah,
Right.
so that's the reason behind the chaining.
Okay, yeah, that sadly makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting topic because I mean, my own personal knowledge only lies within zoos and like
Mhm.
just from what I've seen and what I've worked with, and I mean, we don't have elephants at the zoo anymore, but we did, and it's just you look at what they're given and like in turn on like a zoo standpoint, I guess it was considered awesome from a zoo
Mm.
standpoint, but even then you're looking and you're going, this is like a whole troop of elephants in like a not a small enclosure, but for an elephant, I mean, it's kind of hard to. It's kind of like the whales at SeaWorld. Like how do you even replicate something that's deemed you know efficient?
Yeah, I mean the whales, the orcas and stuff at sea, well, that's really depressing
Yeah.
that they live their whole life in a really tiny pool where they could be, you know, exploring the ocean. It's just, I find that really devastating. And it is the same with elephants too. And I think, it's just, and I was having a discussion about this the other day, the focus on conservation kinds of means that some animals, the welfare of some animals suffer so that people can learn about those animals, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and I also wonder, like, the restriction on the movement of elephants in zoos kind of parallels their restriction when they're being chained up, except, you'd hope that, that at least some of the elephants who are chained up at least get to walk. They might get to walk a few kilometers every week, or, get to go to a dam or a river or socialize with different elephants and that kind of stuff. So it's really all about, how do we make sure that there's some form of enrichment within captivity that actually really makes a difference. And I think it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hear that debate all the time with the big like we mentioned whales and elephants, obviously, but even like tigers and
Mm.
like I mean, stuff like that. It's just the great apes. Like it's hard because you just mentioned it. Like you want people to learn about these things, and one of the best ways for the general public to learn about it is to have them in their vicinity so that they can go, and because no one's ever going to visit a polar bear. Like the
Yeah.
majority of people are never
Mhm.
going to go to the North Pole and visit a polar bear. But if there's one in Toronto, for example, they're going to go see it, they'll learn about it, learn about what they can do to help. But the unfortunate thing is, how do you replicate the North Pole in Toronto? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's just
exactly.
it's such a I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a lose win almost.
Mm. Yeah, and it's just that notion of balance, like, and I'm have chatted to, people who work at zoos who are very much of the idea that the conservation education balances out the restrictions on the animals' freedom, basically.
Mm.
And I mean, conservation funding is super important for zoos, and they need those visitors to fund their conservation program. So yeah, I think it's a tricky balance, and yeah, very complex topic.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the zoo. It's just up. I was just using it for conversation. But um,
Mhm.
another point I wanted to get at with these elephants, and it's another. I find this so fascinating because if you go to like I don't want to say the average person, but a large amount of people, they kind of underestimate the intelligence, the emotional intelligence, um, I guess I'm just going to stick with intelligence. They kind of underestimate the intelligence of animals like this because they're animals. And I don't know what kind of complex humans have given themselves where they're above everything.
Mhm.
But you forget that elephants are incredibly smart, dolphins, octopus, like whatever, the list goes on. But in terms of your research, like just how intelligent emotionally like are elephants, and how dependent are they on connection?
Oh, super intelligent. I mean, I'm not a behaviorist, but I've
Mm-hmm.
read a lot of behavioral research into their intelligence, into their self-awareness, into their connections with others, obviously the capacity for sadness, love, hope, all the sort of the higher level functions of emotionality and intelligence. And you really get that sense when you're just around them and you look into their eyes. And I've even seen, like, elephants who have humor, and elephants who are expressing their opinions about things. And so I had one elephant who I lived next to for a while when I was working on that community project, and her name was Saifa, which means thunder.
Yeah.
um, and she was very cranky. So she was always, if we were on walk, she was always up ahead because she was much too dangerous to be around volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So she kind of needed her own space, which was fine. But yeah, I did have one funny evening when I was like getting ready for bed, and I had music playing on my phone, and I was sort of dancing around the room as I was putting stuff away. And then I hear this like whack on the roof. And I was like, what the hell was that? And then 2 seconds later, whack again. I was like, oh shit, what the hell is going on? So I poked my head out my window, like my wooden hut on stilts, and sci-fi is there chucking a massive chunk of sugarcane towards me, which like hit the roof of my house, and then all the dirt rained down onto my head. And so just as she's getting ready to grab another piece and fling it at me, I'm like, okay, okay, okay. So I turned off my music, and that solved the problem. So
Oh,
they've got good ways of communicating with you as a human. And for me, I did a lot of observation, and some, I did do a lot of up close observation, but a lot more observation at a distance. But it was those kind of like quite intimate moments where you just realize that there is a bit of a sort of there is a very strong social network in places like that, where there's elephants and humans living together. And you kind of, I mean, she obviously in that situation, despite being chained up and limited in her life, she could still express her opinion about things and definitely tell me off for making noise past a certain time when she's ready to sleep.
oh, that is
So
so awesome.
yeah, so that kind of stuff was really fun and interesting, and it's the kind of stuff I talk about in my book as well. Mention a lot of those kind of stories.
Right. Oh man. Yeah, I'm is there even I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like the answer is a hard no, but is there even any way to replicate that kind of emotional connection with an elephant when they're alone? Like in captivity or anything like that? Probably not.
I mean, they have very strong emotional connections with their mahouts. I
Mm.
was lucky to meet a lot of really great mahouts who were really, really passionate about their elephants and really committed to welfare, despite the environmental issues and factors like poverty. And it's very hard for a lot of them, and they're pretty low down socioeconomically in the sort of hierarchy in Thailand. And they've been affected by deforestation as much as their elephants. And of course, there are, people out there who are dodgy and not nice to their elephants. But yeah, I met many people who had these really great, close emotional connections with their elephants, and very much a shared language between them. And it was a real familial bond as well. So I think, there are lots of captive elephants who have these kind of intimate social relationships with their humans and their
Mm-hmm.
human families. And in the case of places like sanctuaries and other places that um, have enrichment programs, elephants are able to be friends and hang out together. And, they're allowed to form friendship groups and that kind of thing. So they do get a chance to kind of express their own emotions and opinions in those settings, which I think is why enrichment and observing enrichment is such a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man. Yeah, I wish you could see me. I wish there was video. I'm smiling ear to ear. I love talking about this stuff.
Mm.
But what is a for like the listeners, what is forgive me for if I pronounce it wrong, but a mammut?
Mahout.
Mahout.
So
Yeah.
Mahout is an elephant caretaker.
Mhm.
So there are sort of a variety of mahouts. I mainly worked with men from indigenous tribes. So they are mainly men, mahouts, and people from indigenous tribes have like ancestrally, several hundred to 1,000 years of ancestral experience working with elephants.
Mhm.
And for them, elephants are really, really closely tied to their culture and all their spiritual traditions. And these tribes were also once traditionally forest dwelling as well, along with their elephants. So the loss of forest was kind of the loss of both, not just the elephants' habitats, but the homes of the humans as well.
Right.
Um, so traditionally, mahouts and those sort of they're sort of animistic tribes who are really, really connected to elephants in the forests. They would capture elephants from the wild, and then it was a form of income, so they could sell some to the north where they were used in logging or for warfare or transport or other forms of civilization building. But they'd also just keep a lot of elephants themselves, sometimes for transport, but also a lot of the time just for spiritual reasons.
Mhm.
Um, and so they would basically semi-domesticate these elephants, and those elephants would live with them in a area of forest where during the day the elephants would be able to roam. But due to deforestation, sadly, the sort of that relationship has changed a lot, and the advent of both logging and tourism has meant that people who may not have those traditions or those strong cultural connections have gotten into elephant tourism for financial reasons, and it might not be based around sort of a intrinsic connection or a level of passion for elephants. Yeah, so that's why I say it's kind of like care ranges across the spectrum, and is really comes down to the individual personality and knowledge of mahouts, of individual mahouts.
Mhm.
But because of the restrictions on land and the restrictions on roaming, every site across Thailand that has captive elephants needs to have mahouts
Mhm.
to do elephant management, basically. So yeah, and that's basically how you keep people and elephants safe in sort of a fairly developed country.
Right. It's so interesting how you can have that human elephant bond,
Mm.
like for like between different, completely different species.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate, right? That some of them have to resort to focusing on money. Is there, now with the case of deforestation, like, is there a way to improve that relationship? Or I guess, what I'm trying to get at is like, is there a way to, like, with deforestation, how do we get past that problem?
I mean, there are reforestation programs that are starting to, improve some areas, and especially within communities, where people would like for their elephants to live in the community rather than in tourist camps.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, my focus on ethical tourism is really about, improving living conditions and improving the natural environment. And in terms of sort of, improving the relationships between mahouts and elephants just generally, a lot of it is about sort of combining, well, allowing the mahouts to, utilize their pretty amazing, extensive Indigenous knowledge about elephant husbandry and elephant care and land management and land use, with contemporary training methods like positive reinforcement and target training, those kind of methods that don't rely on force, that are very gentle. And there are already a lot of methods used by the better, sort of more intuitive mahouts, that do tend towards that gentler side.
Mm-hmm.
So having people like that who are already have pretty great sensitive training methods, are willing to learn new sort of scientific, behaviorally, what's the word, approved, for want of a better word, training methods, to sort of combine those, and to help train others, and to help develop new tourism projects that are all based around what's most gentle and what's most beneficial for elephants.
Right. No, I love that. Yeah, what I love about this whole topic is that the future looks promising. Because there was a term that we learned when we worked at the zoo, because we taught kids about all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and the term was, I'm sure you're familiar with it, ecophobia, where
Yeah.
the problem is, if you tell them all of the facts that are happening currently, there's going to be like a bunch of doom and gloom, and the kids are going to think there's no hope for the future. But when we talk about what you're doing, what these people are doing in terms of improving the mahout culture and the elephant well-being, like, there's just so much hope for the future, which sounds so promising.
Yeah, I do have a lot of hope for the future. It's unfortunate that COVID happened, because
Mm,
that stopping all forms of tourism in Thailand, things got pretty rough for a couple of years, with, humans literally being at risk of starvation without tourism, and that trickling down to the care of elephants. So, for instance, that village that I worked out, where they had 200 elephants and was struggling to care for them, they ended up with 500, because a bunch of elephants and mahouts had to move home from tourist camps when they closed. So
wow.
it really revealed more than ever the reliance on tourism, and the importance of developing, more ethical forms of tourism. But one thing that I think is interesting, and that hopefully we see more of now that, things are getting a bit better and borders are opening, and tourists are going back to Thailand, is that um, a lot of the elephants and mahouts who returned home, not so much to my little village, which really struggles from the lack of elephant food, but to some others where they've got more forests, and they're much better set up to kind of do reforestation and support their elephants, that they don't want to necessarily send their elephants back to tourist camps.
Mm,
So my hope is, and this is shared by other conservationists and welfareists and people who run sanctuaries, is that there'll actually be a bit of a shift now away from the tourist camps and towards the community-based tourism, just because there was such a struggle in moving all these elephants back home. I mean, it was, in some cases, it was several days to a week-long walk from camps to mountains. All this effort and all this, joy that was, despite the struggles, joy that was brought to people by bringing their elephants home. And the support that, there is support out there for these projects that are outside of camps. So my hope is, I know there will be people who definitely will go back to camps because they need the money,
Mm-hmm.
but that there may be a shift now towards more people starting to think, maybe we can do something at home, and maybe we can set something up in this community environment rather than having to send people, or people deciding, well, I've got to leave my family and my home and go to, Phuket on the other side of the country and work in a tourist camp. So yeah, I still do see positives. I'm very keen to get back, which I will be at the end of this year, and just see how the state of play is on the ground, and, continue to help out there.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. So are you currently back in Australia, or are you in Thailand right now?
No, I'm in Australia. So I was meant to go back to Thailand in 2020, but COVID happened, and
Right.
that was that. So yeah, no, it's been a couple of years since I've been able to go over there. Yeah, so the plan is in a couple of months, I'll go over and visit um, all my friends and see all the different sites and see how things have changed since COVID. And yeah, I'm excited to be doing that.
Right. No, that's awesome. So for you currently, like, what would you say is kind of the biggest, or I guess the most exciting kind of project or initiative that you're doing currently in terms of tourism?
I mean, I think having just released the book, it's kind of really um, solidified my desire to go back and help that small village to develop some sustainable tourism options that means they're not quite so dependent on tourist camps. And I think it's been exciting talking to other people working on the ground in Thailand about their opportunities and the possibilities for, working with them and funding, and, working directly with the mahouts to set up something new. So that's kind of where my head's at the moment. And once I get over there and hopefully don't get COVID like everyone seems to be, yeah,
Fingers
it's going to
crossed.
be, fingers crossed. But yeah, it's going to be exciting to think of the next chapter. And I think the good thing with writing a book is that, you do become an expert in a certain area just because, you've just been focusing on something for so long, and it's time to put all that conceptual stuff along with, obviously there was a lot of practical field work, but writing a book is a massive conceptual leap.
Hmm.
So now that that's released and kind of out of my brain, if that makes sense, I kind of have the space now to go, all right, okay, what can I actually do on the ground that's going to start to very practically make things better in a post-COVID elephant tourism world.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. So for people listening, like, what's the book about? Like, what inspired you to write it?
So it was all my experiences there, but it really was the combination of all the stories of the elephants that I met, as well as all the stories of the mahouts. And that kind of shone through my various experiences working on different projects and at different sanctuaries. So it's kind of a narrative driven story, but it's also very much like I reference sort of a lot of behavioral research and that kind of stuff, which is all very fascinating and I think contributes to the story a lot. So yeah, the real crux of the story is the aftermath of the destruction of 70% of Thailand's forests,
Hmm.
and also the the joy of working on these amazing, more ethical projects that, and seeing kind of the shift in elephant emotions and the sort of joy of their experiences through enrichment, and these sort of programs that have been very carefully designed to help them, live a better life. So yeah, it's really about, I go into the sad stuff
Hmm.
and the distressing stuff about elephants, but I really wanted it to be a story of hope and potential. Um, and yeah, I think that's where it ended up. And yeah, I hope that the reader can get that sense too, that yes, there are a lot of issues, and it's a very, very complex, difficult topic, but there is a lot of hope, and there's a lot of ways that the individual person, like whether from home, donating or advocating from home, or literally traveling to Thailand and visiting or volunteering on one of these projects can really make a tangible difference. So literally an individual can make a tangible difference just by supporting both, personally supporting and financially supporting some of these projects.
Yeah, definitely. Now for my listeners, where can they find the book? Where can they find more about you?
Okay, so I have my website, which is nikkisavvides.com,
Hmm.
which pretty much has everything on it. But you can get my book, which is called After the Forest, Thailand's Captive Elephants and Their People, via Amazon. Best thing to do is to just search my name, Nikki Savvides, and that will come up. There's both a Kindle and a paperback version. But you can also access that via my website. What else? I've got my Facebook page, which is at After the Forest, an Instagram page, which is also at After the Forest, which is just photos from my travels that are meant to complement the book. And what else? Oh, and it's also available via Book Depository, Apple Books, etc. And that is all linked to through my website.
Awesome. I'll put those links down below. Nikki, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I loved this discussion, and it just, yeah, thank you for all the work you do with the elephants and the tourism and all of that. It's been a blast to have you on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It was a really awesome conversation. Very much enjoyed myself.
And I'm actually planning to go to Asia next summer. So I don't know if you'll be in Thailand, but maybe you can hook me up with some tourism.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. Got many ideas and suggestions.
Oh, perfect. I love that. And to all my listeners, I will see you guys next time.